welcome to Bringing Your Land to Life session, held by myself, Ollie Rodker, and Ben, and we're going to introduce ourselves, and we're going to be working from the same presentation, so it's probably going to be a bit of a comedy duo as we try and click back and forth and work out who's going to say what. I am Ollie Rodker. I'm a founder and a director of the Ecological Land Cooperative. I've been working with the ELC for 15 years. Before that, I was very active in various environmental projects, and I got into land use and farming because of my concern about environmental issues, basically, and seeing land use as a key issue around how we were interacting with the planet and with the natural world around us. I'm a paid staff member for ELC. I work on the monitoring of our farms. And I have a few other hats as well, but I won't go into those now.
Thanks, Ollie. Yeah, so I'm Ben Raskin. I work mainly for the Soil Association. My background is in organic growing. I helped set up the community farm near Bristol. And I'm here today really with my chair of the CSA network hat on. And I'll tell you more about the community supported agriculture network as we go through. So yeah, back over to you, Ollie.
So I wanted to just, give a 1-2 minute preamble to this, and why I think this session is important, and why bringing people back onto the land is important. Because in the context of a wider climate crisis and a nature crisis, which I imagine most people here see that we're in to some degree, in my view, that is necessarily, if it carries on, going to lead to a food crisis, and that necessarily will lead on to a social crisis. So these crises will ramp up. And a key thing that we need to do in re-establishing different ways of working and different frameworks is to get more people back onto the land, and get more people back onto our farms, and get more people back working with nature and producing the things that we need. And in this country particular, a very sort of industrial, post-industrial country, there's a lot of disconnection from the land. And so this session is about two different models, two different avenues, ways of getting people to be better connected to land and better connected to land production, food production, but also forestry production, fibre production, the other things that we need. So there's a lot of talk about, rewilding, about environmental issues, but for me also we need repeopling. We have to repeople the land alongside all of the other things that we need to do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the ELC model. To start with, I have to point that over there. We're a social enterprise and a cooperative set up 15 years ago with the aim of trying to create a model that would allow affordable access to land and be able to bring in more people to land, because as I'm sure most of you know, there is a real barrier around land access and the price of land. We develop small residential holdings. We currently have 6 sites across the country with 11 farms on, 7 in development, hopefully more land coming towards us, and we are definitely offering much more affordable access to land than the market will allow. We don't really think that we are properly affordable in a meaningful sense, because you still need, quite a bit of money to get started in your own farming operation. In terms of diversification, what it means is that on one of our sites, mainly we have 3 different farms. They all do a different set of things, hopefully complementing each other and working together. Very simply, our model is that we raise money through investment or capital or grants, loans, fundraising in various ways. We buy bare land or receive farms in donation to us. We create and design a little cluster of farms of diverse businesses. We then apply for planning permission, which is a very strenuous and painful process in this country at the moment, to allow those farm businesses to have a residential holding. So we're creating new homes in the countryside with an agricultural tie so that people can live on site. And it's crucial that people live on the site because, A, that allows them to be close to their farm operation and the things that are going on their farm and respond very quickly to issues, and also in the long run it obviously brings down the cost if we can create that housing at an affordable level, or a much more affordable level than rural housing is generally in this country at the moment. Having got a planning permission, we then we look for the people, the stewards, the farmers, the tenants use different words in different contexts, who will take on the farms. There's an application process. We create a management plan that's a broad set of principles that covers all of our management plans, but may have specifics around each individual site. And we then sign the lease or the rental agreement with the people, with the stewards and the farmers, and we monitor them in an ongoing way against that management plan and check. Really, the basics are that they are not causing any environmental harm, preferably regenerating and improving the environment, that they are continuing with an agricultural livelihood, that they're there resident on the farm, so that the planning condition that we have is not being abused. Otherwise, they're free to get on with their farm business in any way that they choose. We hope that is a model of affordability. I say hope because, like I just said, although we're massively undercutting a market price of doing this, it's still costing tens of thousands to set up the things that you need for a new farm. We provide some things as ELC. The farmers have to bring other things themselves. Might be water infrastructure, it might be polytunnels, might be sheds and machinery, etc. These are very small scale farms. We're talking in terms of the kinds of farms that are being seen here over this couple of days. These are micro farms. These are market garden size. We're talking 3 to 10 acres. We hope and plan that there will be bigger, more extensive farms and businesses over time, but so far, really for reasons of capital and finance, we've been at this very small scale, and at that small scale you can make a decent livelihood with low costs, with low input costs and low expenditure outgoings, but you can survive. Whereas if we had to buy 100 acres and set up a 100-acre farm, we couldn't afford to do that at the market price. Our leases are 150 years, so they're long term, and a crucial issue, and we might come back to this later, is about security. We want to offer security to people, and so that they can invest time and work and their energy in the long run. But we retain a freehold, which means that we have a leverage to make sure that they are abiding by the management plan. So that if they break the management plan, then because we hold the freehold and they hold the leasehold, we can ask for changes, basically, because they're breaking the legal contract. So that's our broad model, and at this point I will hand over to Ben.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to sort of move on a little bit from the land ownership thing that Ollie's been talking about to talk about a business model, which is the community-supported agriculture, which some of you, I'm sure, know already. The basic concept here is that the farmer and the person eating the food are sharing the risk and reward of producing it. So in a typical model, I as the farmer, I take all the risk, I pay for the seed, I pay to rent the land, I pay for my tractor and my diesel and my labour, and then I hope when the crop comes in that I can sell it. And I hope that there's somebody there that wants to buy it, and I hope that I can sell it for enough that it's covered my cost and a bit more. And on the other hand, you might be my potential people that are going to eat it, and you're turning up to a shop hoping that there's going to be some food there, and that you can afford to buy it. And in a good year, I might make quite a lot of money because the prices are high and I've done well. And in a bad year, I might get nothing and might lose my farm. So the idea of CSA really is to try and share some of that. And there's lots of different models for how that might work. But there are some broad shared sort of approaches around this. So broadly speaking, if not surprisingly, when people get involved, they tend not to want to use a lot of artificial inputs. So most CSAs are agroecological. Some of them are certified organic, but often not, because they're so close to the people eating it. Their members are involved, so they don't need a third-person certification. So they tend to be agroecological. They tend to be quite a viable business model. So there's good cash flow. There's people committed, customers, members are committed to buying it. So you get a lot of sort of loyalty to the business. There's that intrinsic community investment. So there's the money that you're paying for your share, but often there's an investment in time as well, and local businesses then quite often want to come in and support it as well. One example with the community farm where I worked, we had a really bad year in 2012. It was really wet. A lot of our crops failed. We'd only just set up. We would have gone under. If we hadn't been a CSA or a community-owned farm, we would have gone under. But we went out to our members and we said, "Oh, we're in trouble. Look what's happened." And we had £20,000 at the end of a month that basically carried us over. So there's a real resilience there. Most of them then have this sort of very local, direct sales model. Now that's not inevitable, and I think if we once we sort of start to talk about how we feed cities, I think there are opportunities to bring them to places that are a little bit further away. But certainly at the moment, most CSAs are very local and very direct. So the vision of the CSA network is a thriving CSA in every neighbourhood, and you can see, well, you hope you can see, you might not be able to at the back. So in March 2015, we had 33 CSAs in the UK. We now reckon we're somewhere around 200. And that sort of big spike you can see was around COVID, which I think part of that was around, oh my God, where am I going to get my food from? And part of it, which is perhaps a sort of longer going thing, is people want to re-engage with their community. They want to be more connected. I think a lot of us re-evaluated things during COVID, and I think an interest in local food production and community has been one of those things that's happened. So there's a whole range of reasons. I could probably talk for half an hour about why CSAs make sense. I'm going to just sort of whiz through a few of them. So there's a health and well-being aspect. The Soil Association did a report on the CSA at the end of the program that they ran 10 years or so ago, and most people in that report reported that their well-being improved from being involved in a CSA. They felt happier. Part of that I think is around community. Part of it is around being on farms. So particularly around those people that came and actively volunteered and took part. Both mental and physical health were improved through that sort of direct involvement with their food production. There's an environmental benefit, clearly, because the farms are being managed agroecologically. Again, not surprisingly, there's a real community benefit. There's that direct engagement, which benefits both the community and the farmer. I remember one farmer telling me, he had supplied into supermarkets, and then he was doing his own box scheme. He was approached by a group wanting to set up a CSA on his farm, and he was like, "Oh, I don't know, it sounds like, oh," and he said, "It's brilliant, I just get all my mates coming, and I've got this whole new community." And whereas he had felt a bit lonely and isolated within his business, suddenly he felt right at the heart of it and really valued and almost celebrated as kind of this food hero. He was the guy that they all relied on. It made a real difference. Again, around the community, there's these volunteering opportunities. So, a lot of CSAs will have a work share where you could work instead of pay for a share, but also, they will often have, the community farm, we had a squash harvesting day. We planted about an acre of squashes, and it would have taken a long time for it, to go around and pick them up. And we used to get kind of 50 people turning up and throwing squashes all over the field, and it was a lot of fun, as well as getting a job done. And then that, the benefit to the economy of every pound staying within that community rather than, being leached out towards, all of these other supply chains. From a business point of view, as a farmer setting up, there are some real business advantages. It's, I mentioned the resilience of the farming model. There's obviously that direct routes to market, but there's also the cash flow advantage. So if your members are committed, they're paying, often they'll be paying a weekly or a monthly subscription, and they're paying for a share of the harvest. They're not paying, oh, you haven't got any cucumbers this week, I'm not buying anything. So that you're going to get that income every month, and that really helps you to sort of ride out perhaps some of those bumps if a crop fails, or it's a real advantage to the producer. And we've seen that where CSAs are run well, and like any business, they can be run well or run badly, but where they're run well, they prove to be a really resilient business model. Often CSAs can be set up either by a community group or by a farmer, or sometimes a mixture of both. And you don't have to run your whole business as a CSA. So quite a lot of businesses will have an element of it, that is community supported agriculture, and they might then do some retail or wholesale to balance that out. So you can use it as a way of balancing out your business. And then the other big advantage, which kind of ties in, the reason for this session is around new entrants. Ollie's very clearly outlined why we need more people, and we do need more people. There's a real shortage of trained growers, for instance. There's lots of people with 2 years experience. There's very few people with 5 years experience or 10 years experience who are going to run these new farms. So how do we bring those new people in? Well, actually CSAs potentially are a great way of doing that. You can start, you do the odd squash day, then you go, oh, actually, I really enjoy this. I'm going to volunteer once a week. Oh, maybe I can be employed one day a week at the CSA. And a lot of CSAs will employ, more than one part-time member of staff. So you're learning on the job, you're getting experience, you're building confidence. And then maybe you set up your own CSA, because at the moment, most CSAs are oversubscribed. And so quite often you'll find they spawn sister CSAs down the road, because most CSAs don't want to grow big. Around 120, 150 members is a nice size. You keep that community, but you've got enough financial viability. And then, so you're building that capacity and effectively sort of multiplying the number of CSAs. Hang on, where are we? There we go. Too many bullet points on my notes. So the way that the CSA network particularly is trying to support those new entrants, we have obviously lots of networking opportunities. We run events. We've got mentoring programs. We've got lots of resources. And then along with people like Land Workers Alliance and ELC, we do quite a lot of policy work. So trying to really lobby government for a supportive framework for new entrants and for these local food supply systems. I'm going to just quickly skate over. We've got a couple of just nice pictures, basically a little bit break from the words, just to show effectively the scale of some of these operations. Then they're small, but they're not tiny. They're pretty productive. You can run a really good, profitable business that can supply a good number of people. This one is Tomnaha in Perthshire. It's 5 acres. They do a 25-week season box. So not all CSAs will produce for 12 months. Sometimes producing a share in the hungry gap can be a bit tricky, but some do. Some buy in a little bit to support the share. So Tomnaha does veg, fruit. They do eggs. They've got a retail and wholesale business on the side. They do flowers as well, and they've been going for about 8 years. And then this one is School Farm CSA down in near Totnes. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go on. This one, thank you. So again, this is 3 acres. They've been going quite a while. They teach accredited courses as well, so they're bringing on new entrants. A lot of CSAs have a remit to train and to bring new people on. They're also doing things like seed production and wholesale to supplement the business. So there's some really diverse models around there. So that's CSAs. I'm going to hand back over to Ollie.
I'm just going to talk for a couple of slides about some of the benefits. I mean, I think you can see them pretty well from those pictures that Bender showed from those two farms. Tomnaha in Scotland. Well, I just went to that market garden a few weeks ago. It was stunning. For Scotland, anyone who says that we can't grow a range of food and flowers in this country should go up there and have a look at that. It's really inspiring if you're ever in Perthshire near Crieff. Really incredible. So yeah, there's a lot of diversity on these farms. There's a lot of crops. There's a lot of things going on at the same time. And I guess this is where the sort of the title of this session about bringing diversity in is it's a people thing and it's a nature thing. And when you have different crops and different productive systems going on, you bring different kinds of wildlife in. You bring different kinds of pests and predators and pollinators and all sorts of things. And this is the picture on the side of this slide is Green and Reach in Devon. There's a couple more pictures coming on. This was a site that we took on that was 2 fields of arable. It had brassicas the last few years, 2 fields of pasture. People told us when we bought it that you couldn't grow any food there. The land was so bad. I mean, there's a metre deep topsoil there. Some of the site is incredible, and it's because people get down into the detail of the site. They can find the good pieces of land. They can find the microclimates. They can find the potential. That's what you can get when you get people dealing at a small scale level with the land that you just can't do on a bigger scale. And that's not a criticism of bigger scale. We need a lot of food production, but there are some real benefits that come from this kind of diversity. So we have our model is to have multiple businesses on one site. I mean, that's not actually necessary, because if someone popped up after this session and said, I've got 5 acres of my farm, you can have that, and so one of these things would go, great, we'll just set up one, that's fine. But there are some benefits that come with having multiple businesses. You get synergies. People can use different products from the businesses. You can share transport, etc. I think it says a little bit more about that on this side. Yeah, I could talk through that. You can probably all read it as well. There's a lot of reasons to have more diversity on a farm and in our land. There are business reasons, there are climate reasons, there are nature reasons, there are skills and community reasons. And because we have a range of businesses on our sites, that usually means that there are different kinds of community elements going on. So one farm might like to work with children and they have school visits coming. Another farm is providing food to local restaurants and pubs and is connected to a local retail and distribution or processing network. And another farm is maybe supplying fruit trees over a much wider area, and so is connected into a sort of network of fruit tree nurseries, like one of our farms is. So that kind of diversity happens on all sorts of different levels, and there's no one blueprint for it. It really depends on the people, what their interests are, what the land is like, what the local economy is like. Yeah, a big reason, a big barrier for people in the longer term in farming is isolation. People are working on their own quite often, and over time that can have social and health issues around it. And one of the great things about having smaller farms together is that there's a lot of solidarity, that people can cry on each other's shoulders when the wind tears down a polytunnel, or they can be pleased about an ecological survey which has shown the return of a rare pollinating insect. And there's meals, there's a lot of practical and also social and emotional benefits that come from working with other people. And some of the things that Ben said that relate to CSAs, obviously apply to having, more farms and more people working closer together. I'm just seeing if there's anything on this slide that I haven't mentioned. I don't think so. I mean, we could talk for a while about the various benefits on the farms that we know, but I don't think that's, you'll be bored of us pretty quickly, and we definitely want to allow plenty of time for questions. So I'll return to Ben at this point.
Thank you. Yeah. So, and again, I think actually we might have covered some of this already as well, but I think one of the things that really is powerful for me about CSAs, beyond other ways of getting that diversification and stacking on farms, is that you're committed to that community business. So it takes it almost to a deeper level. You're all part of this community endeavour. So again, I think it's great to have lots of businesses on site where you're sharing stuff and getting those advantages, but you're still within that. You're still running your own businesses, and if something goes wrong, if you're sick for 2 months, then suddenly your business can't run. In the CSA model, there's support from within that. You can go on holiday for 3 weeks, and there's other people within the business to support that. So there's some real, that community feeling and support, I think. It sounds fluffy sometimes, but there's actually a real commercial case behind it, and a financial case that helps the business. And certainly, I think the climate proof and the biodiversity, those are things that I think apply to a lot of similar agroecological type business models. But the financial and the pound coming back into that, directly into that community, all of that is staying there. I think that's one of the things that really makes CSA model powerful for me. However, it's not, as with anything, nothing's going to be perfect. there are things you've got to be aware of, in the same way if you've got different enterprises on the same holding, there might be tensions. When you're closely entwined in a community, that can have its tensions. It's not for everybody. You need to be able to probably compromise more. And one of the interesting things we see with some CSAs, you get a really dynamic, innovative person that sets it up, and then they don't really want to work with anyone else because it was their vision, and that so that can be tricky. And how do you get those founders to step back but stay part of the community? That's not always easy. Ensuring that all of those sort of enterprises, whether it's CSA or others, making sure that they're properly complementary. They don't compete. You don't want 5 salad growers on the same site because you're going to end up, trying to feed the same markets. And there's a lot of things around tenancy models, cooperative models. Actually the legal side of it is what ELC does so well. How do you make sure that really is fair and equitable? And long-term tenancies are definitely the best way to get people to properly be valued and take care of the land. But most CSAs, most farmers, are on much shorter tenancies, and that's the power of the LC model. I think they're really investing long term into their farmers and tenants. So and there's a question of scale as well. We talked about it a little bit. Most of what the LC are doing, most of CSAs, they are micro, small scale. Now that doesn't mean that they can't be a powerful force. It doesn't. If we had a CSA in every neighbourhood, if every village had a CSA, that's a lot of food we can producing. Still, probably doesn't sort of help Birmingham and London and Manchester necessarily at scale. So, it's not going to be the answer for everybody. We need that diversity of food production still, but it could be a really big part of the solution. And it's not for every farmer. Not every farmer wants to have 100 people coming onto their farm every week. So you have to recognise that only a proportion of people might want to do it. But what's interesting, we ran a horticultural apprenticeship scheme at the Soil Association for a number of years, and it was amazing how many of those people that wanted to be growers wanted specifically to work for CSAs. That was their intention. They knew about CSAs, and that's where they wanted to work. They didn't want to work on their own in a field. They wanted to be part of a community. And if you're engaged and supported, you're more likely to stay longer, you're more likely to be successful, you're more likely still to be growing, at the age of 50 or 60. And I see quite a lot of older, slightly broken growers. It's hard work, physically hard work. And if you've got to do it all on your own, and you've got to market, and you've got to, that's tough. Whereas if you're doing that as part of a group and being supported, you're more likely to survive. So I think I'm back to you. Keep on you the wrong thing.
This is the comedy bit. So we're just going to talk about a couple of, in detail, a couple of our examples. One, Green and Reach in Devon was the first site that we bought in 2009. It took us 4 years to get planning permission on that site. We had to deal with a lot of skepticism and a lot of fear, both from within the council and the planning authorities and local people, that we were a Trojan horse as a house build. We were really just a house building operation, because how could anybody really just want to be setting up small farms? What a ridiculous idea. No one would want to do that. Well, actually, times have really changed in that 10 years, and we don't really get that. That worry is not there nearly so much. I mean, A, we've proved ourselves that we actually are serious about this, but B, I think people really do understand the need for local food in the way that has actually changed a lot in 10 years. At Green and Reach, there are 3 businesses. One is a veg box and a fruit tree nursery. One is a sort of salad and flowers for local retail shops and restaurants. One is a sort of more farm to fork business growing food for a food business. There are some areas of ecological sensitivity on the site, so we do a particularly extra bit of monitoring there to see that grassland is being looked after, and there are lots of other things going on around those farms. It's 20 acres. They were just bare field, as I said. We put in a track barn and provided the planning permission. The farmers have brought everything else themselves. And now we have gone from a temporary permission, which is what we had to begin with, that we asked for, a temporary permission for 5 years. Having proved ourselves, that has now been turned into a permanent permission, so people are able, finances notwithstanding, they're able to build themselves a permanent home, a much better home than the sort of first round, one that will see them out, hopefully, and that can meet much more the sort of ecological building requirements that we would like, but are very difficult to do within a 5-year temporary permission. That's an overhead view of it, and you can see in the top of the picture is a cluster of the buildings, polytunnels, shed that was put in, and some of the grazing and the market gardening coming down the hill. And there it stops. There we go. That's a picture of some of the residents. There's some cooney pigs there, some bees, people with their stock. And here we come to Kaitan and Furs Hill, which happily there is a CSA on the ELC site, so we can talk about that bit of synergy. It's an 18-acre site on Gower in South Wales. Kaitan were an existing CSA that really wanted to expand onto further land. They only had a 5-acre field. They wanted more land. They were very popular. They had a lot of demand. They needed more growing space, and they came to us to see if we could work with them to help them secure some local land that they knew was coming up for sale. That was higher quality land than their current field. And we managed, amazingly really, actually, we managed to do it in the timescales for this piece of land coming onto the market. It was more land than they wanted, so they were established there immediately because they didn't need a planning permission, they didn't need housing on that site being already established. And then on the remaining land, we've been going through a long planning process for a One Planet development, which is a particularly Welsh bit of policy that allows people to live on land and with a land-based business if they meet certain sustainability criteria. And we have just recently, earlier this year, found out that we've got the first that first OPD permission. It's the first one in the Gower. It's an AONB, an area of outstanding natural beauty, so it's been very difficult to get that there because of the fears around landscape and building new buildings. So, at every stage there are difficulties, and every stage we slowly get over them. Kaitan are a very successful CSA, and I think one of the examples that Ben referred to earlier, where they have actually sort of set off and spawned, if you like, a number of other CSAs and market gardens around Swansea, and that's actually got to the scale now. I mean, do you know how many are around Swansea? There's quite a few.
I can't remember. Neil, you don't happen to know, do you? It's three or four,
yeah.
I think, at least.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely it's more than 2 or 3, I think, and that's now making quite a significant difference. Swansea's got a lot of low-income people with a lot of food poverty, for want of a better expression, and so they're really starting to make a difference now in that urban area. So it's not just a sort of small-scale single thing in a rural area, really starting to be in peri-urban areas, which is really making a difference on a social level. So it's a really good example of how this can slowly scale up in a regional basis. That's a picture of their field centre, and then the OPD plot is on the right with the polytunnel.
And
we might be near the end.
That's fine. Yeah, it's worth saying as well that Tom at Kaitan also runs courses on CSAs. He's quite a sort of inspirational figure within the CSA movement. So, for those of you that are interested in learning more, it's worth doing his courses. So this is just a couple of final case studies before we move on to questions. So Molescroft Farm is in Yorkshire. Really interesting story. Tamara Hall is an incredible woman who, after a sort of head injury, moved back to the farm, couldn't drive, was kind of, again, sort of slightly uncomfortable with owning lots of land and wanting the community to be more involved. Initially started bringing allotments onto the farm, and then sort of got interested in CSAs, did a Nuffield scholarship. I think she said partly because she wanted to go and visit Japan, but which is sort of where CSAs started. But then brought on, so they've now got this CSA Frith farm on the farm, which again supplies into local veggies and stuff. And there's a really nice quote which she said, we've often done things on the farm without an eye to profit. And then these fields have tended to be profitable. And so it's kind of that idea that, if you do things because you're committed and because you think it's right, often you can make them work and make them profitable. I thought that was kind of quite interesting. And then finally, Wakelands, which I'm sure a lot of you will be aware of, a very pioneering agroforestry holding over in Suffolk, Martin and Wolf. You can see it's this sort of little green oasis in the middle of a East Anglian desert. But following Martin Ann's death, they've turned the sort of focus around a little bit, as Ollie was talking about, this sort of stacked enterprise, lots of things going on. The whole system, they're looking at supply chains and growing stuff. It's only 23 hectares, but there's a lot going on. And in particular, there's the Real Veg Wakeland CSA. So they've only begun for a couple of years. They've got now 35 shares. So they're working sort of with bakeries and other businesses. So there's that real synergies on site, and I think a lot of them see the benefits of that. Plenty of time for questions if you've got them. Yeah. Can you wait? Sorry, just wait until the microphone just there. Sorry. Thank you.
Thanks both. That was really, really interesting. I was just wondering, my kind of perception of a lot of small-scale farms is that they're very reliant on volunteers to reduce labour costs. And I was wondering, especially with the ELC, whether obviously that kind of comes with a heap of different concerns about whether we should have farms that are reliant on volunteers, and whether the ELC, is that something that you kind of discourage, other ways of supporting small farmers so that they can actually provide paid opportunities?
It's a good question. Like low wages and self-exploitation and exploitation of volunteer workforce is definitely an issue. We don't take an active role, I think, in telling people that they should or shouldn't have volunteers. To be honest, it's quite hard enough what we're doing, and setting up small farms is really hard. And I think, we're already trying to meet sort of financial viability, integration with the local community, with maybe new people from outside of the community, keeping planning authorities happy. We have investors who invest in the model. So it's like, it's really quite pragmatic. How many hurdles do you try and leap over in one go? Having said that, there's plenty of awareness of some of those issues. Not all of our farms, I would say, are dependent on volunteers. It's quite variable. Some use them very little, and it might be more like occasional weekends. Some do depend on people being there through the growing season. But the intention, and I hope it's true, but I guess I can't really comment on the detail on any one particular farm, is that those people are also being trained, and that is a worthwhile training. And where possible, they would be getting some other rewards, whether there's living there for free, food, or even a financial recompense as well. And mainly the people doing these farms are motivated by social and environmental reasons, so they want to do the best that they can. And that we definitely look for people who have that view, I guess. But I mean, I think it is an issue, just as low-paid workforce is an issue throughout farming, and in fact is an issue in wider society. Most of the things we use in this country are coming from people who are low-paid somewhere in the world. So I mean, you're raising an important question, but I'd say the answers to it are very structural and very deep. So that's a pub conversation for later.
Thank you. If you set up a CSA and you needed some big, expensive infrastructure at the beginning, like polytunnels or like a small tractor, that sort of thing, how does that work in terms of finance? Do you ask members to invest up front in that sort of thing? Do you get my gist?
Yeah. So investment in capital items is always tricky, and I think it's a little bit tied into the sort of volunteer labour. How you set up the business is really important, and relying on grants, for instance, or relying on an unprofitable business model, or relying on volunteers, they're all potentially structural problems. Your business has to work as a business, whether that's a CSA or whether it's not. Getting grant investment, so a lot of CSAs will get grants, and often local grants are quite attractive. Where we see often CSAs fail is where they use the grant to pay the growers' wages for 2 years, and then they get to the end and they realise they haven't really got a sustainable business model because they've been using the grant to pay the growers' wages, and now they don't know what to do. But where you use it to build a polytunnel or to buy a tractor, then that can work really well. It gives you that initial investment. So again, at the community farm, we did specific fundraising for specific items. That can work really well. But it is difficult. It's expensive. As Ollie said, it's expensive setting up a farm, and even on a small scale, you've got to buy stuff, and how you get that money up front is tricky. So whether that's going to invest or whether it's sort of it's quite often small CSAs will get people to buy for a year, even though they're not getting very much that first year. And you'd be amazed how many committed people there are that want these things to work. Crowdfunding is just more widely is another way. So even if it's not directly your members, you can do that. I mean, there's a grower at the moment crowdfunding for a tractor. She's not a CSA, but I think she's nearly hit her target. So there's people keen to support some of this stuff, but it's not always easy. But yeah. In the middle, and then at the front afterwards.
Firstly, I'd just really like to applaud these initiatives. They sound like absolutely amazing schemes, so thank you for your efforts. You focused mainly, with the CSA model, you focused mainly on arable. I just was wondering what your experience of the model as applicable to sort of livestock farming, and does that work as well?
So yeah, I mean, in theory, it can be applicable to anything. They tend to be mostly horticulture, I think for two reasons. Personally, because it's relatively easy to plant some crops and look after them. It's quite a bit harder to suddenly get a few cows or a few pigs. But there are actually quite a few livestock CSAs. There's honey CSAs, there's flower CSAs, there's wood fuel CSAs. So in anything where normally somebody would produce and sell it, you can do as a kind of cooperative community model. So, I mean, in Stroud, for instance, which is sort of where some of the longest standing CSAs are, there's been a dairy and a livestock CSA for quite a while. And some things like, sort of sheep, beef boxes, that sort of thing can work quite well. You can commit up front, pay up front to have half a cow, and then you get your half a cow at the end, So there's some quite simple ways of doing it. Yeah.
And just a second question, if I may. With the CSA scheme sounds brilliant, but how do you mitigate for the potential environmental impact of kind of 100 people a week turning up to the farms? Is there local sort of damage risk to the farm with that level of footfall?
It's a really good question, and I think different CSAs have approached that in different ways. So I remember I can't think of the name of the one. Gareth Seas. Anyway, one near Lymington, where they're on a main road, and they say that most of their members actually are coming back on their way from work. And Canal Side, thank you. So they have looked at that. They have, so some people do drive to pick up their stuff, but they think most don't. Camel CSA in Cornwall has electric bikes where they deliver their shares out. Other CSAs have drop-off points, so they'll sort of deliver to one drop-off point. But there's a balance for some of them around, if they just deliver it, then they feel that they're just becoming a box scheme, and they want that community engagement. And actually what makes it a CSA is people coming to the site. And I think the issue becomes if you're then too far away from where all of your members are, and I guess in an ideal world, they'd love their members to all be within half a mile and they'd all cycle or walk. But I think some CSAs have really thought about it quite hard, but I don't think there's necessarily easy answers for some of it. But yeah, there was a question at the front, and then.
Can I just come back to your first question about livestock? I think it's interesting because I think another factor is about scale, and so far these kinds of models have functioned on a smaller scale because mainly of financial barriers. Basically, we're smaller, community-orientated, quite grassroots organisations. We're not levering in a lot of capital and finance, basically. My hope, and there'll be lots of issues with this, but my hope is that over time, and as various things become apparent in the world that there will be more finance available, and some of these models can scale up. And certainly in terms of livestock, you just, there's a certain, if you're going to be a commercial livestock operation, you need a certain amount of ground if those animals are going to have a decent life and not be kept in a small enclosed space. So there's just some physical issues around the amount of land that you need, and that requires a certain amount of finance. So I think that will change. And we on ELC farms, there's small scale livestock, but it's not really at a commercial level. They're more like integrated into a mixed farming system rather than being part of the commercial economics of the business. But yeah, I think that will shift over time.
Thanks very much for the talk. I'd like to ask, so a lot of the backlash of, I suppose, this response would be coming from ameliorating the problems we're in with regards to greed and then the lack of direct sales and money that farmers get in the wholesale market. So bigger companies not giving a fair share to the farmer. What with regards to OFN and things like direct selling models, the open food network and other ways of selling, can CSA link to it? To what degree will that help? And a second question, if I can, is with regards to legal structures, are there common ways of, what are the most common legal structures like non-profits, CICs, or cooperative governance structures are suitable for CSAs?
Okay. So I'll do the second bit first. I think there's a real mix is the short answer. So there's cooperatives and CRCs. I think there might be one or two charities. I think it's a bit of a range. On the CSA network website, there's lists of different models and suitability. So it's probably worth going into a bit more detail on that. And then the other one, sorry, the backlash. Yeah. Sorry, Open Food Network, and yeah. So it's quite an interesting one. We do talk about that because in some ways those become just a selling platform, and in theory for CSAs you want that much more direct commitment. But what they can do potentially is offer the delivery model for the share. So I think there are opportunities, and we have talked to them about how we link in. But I think some CSAs feel like it's almost they're sort of going too much into a kind of conventional sales model again. So I think it can create tensions potentially, but I think there are opportunities definitely, and yeah, definitely around the sort of the distribution bit of it. So yeah. So there was go on.
I'll just say on the legal model, ELC is in shorthand is a BENCOM, a society for the benefit of the community. So that's a particular type of legal structure. It means we're monitored by the Financial Conduct Authority, and it means that we can take investment and pay interest, but yet not be a bank, basically. So people can invest in us and buy community shares. And that's a model that is quite widely found in the community sort of land trust network, where there are community housing entities and organisations, but it's certainly not the only one. And yeah, there is information out there. It's longish. There's a great publication. I'm going to forget the name of it. There's a couple of places where you can find a lot of information about different legal structures, basically via ELC's website and another website called Community Land. Co-ops UK have information about legal structures.
Great. So there's one there, and then there was one at the back on the left. How are we doing for time?
10 to.
So we've got 10 minutes. So yeah, 2 or 3 more questions.
Thank you. You gave an example, was it Green and Reach, where they spent 4 years to get planning. In that time, the land was owned, it was bought and just sitting there? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, there's a longer answer, which is that we rented some of the fields out for grazing to a local sheep farmer. We had some surveys done. We visited it and sort of kept an eye on it and had a few bits of work done. We had it topped once, I think. But I mean, essentially, yes, it was just sitting there. And subsequently, because of that and the sort of craziness of that in a way, what we've actually done is allow people to rent land. So not the longer lease, but a much shorter term rental, so that people can get started using the land and maybe, mulching beds or planting trees or doing a few things that we felt wouldn't disturb the long-term view of the land or long-term prospects of the land and get to know the land, even though we hadn't got the full permission. We've made much better use of the land, but that also actually creates some issues because people still can't live there, and so then they're living locally and paying local rental prices whilst working on the land, but not having the time to have it. Do you know what I mean? So I wouldn't say we've fully cracked it.
Yeah, and was that the key permission, that the living on the land, that was the key? was that the key permission, the living on the land?
Yeah, the permission is all about the living on the land. So we could take on a field tomorrow and just start and turn a pasture into a market garden. It's agricultural use. It's not a planning issue. I mean, there's lots of political things we could say about the way planning works with agriculture, but essentially that's the case. What becomes a big issue is when you want housing. So sheds and building agricultural buildings up to a certain size, not an issue. Tiny house, in fact a hole in the ground that you want to live in, no. Yeah. Long, very expensive killing process.
and just one final, you talked about how with that initially you had a 5-year permission, and so the building that people could live in was not, I suppose, up to what you might hope in terms of ecological standards. Yeah. What did that look like, and then what did the one that did sort of live up to your ecological standards in terms of a building?
So to begin with, in pretty much every case, people have brought in mobile homes and static caravans, and in some cases they've really done them up and made them really pretty nice and put cladding and extra roofs over and extra insulation around them, and you would hardly know that there's a caravan inside there. In other cases, they're much more a caravan just sort of out in the field, and that's just up to people's preferences and resources and time and money. Nobody actually has built a permanent house yet. We're going through the process of we then have to get so we've got a permanent permission at that site in Devon, but we then have to get the actual house agreed. So, which should be a little bit more of a formality, but still have to go through that process, and you get into building regulations, another set of legal issues and parameters, and it's obviously a more expensive house, and so there's more paperwork basically is what it comes down to. So we're still in that process with that first site, and that is the only site that does have permanent permission. Our second site in Sussex we will apply for permanent permission this year, and we should get that on 2 of the farms. But yeah, I can't. Hopefully they will be much more able to meet a sort of set of environmental building parameters. I mean, and there's a long-term goal is that some of the farms can be providing trees and timber, and we can do a lot of the building, in-house and get cheaper materials because we've got a really good network. So we can see how it works, but unfortunately, in this regulatory framework, it's slow. I mean, there's a more political thing I could say about people just needing to get on and do this anyway, but that again is maybe another conversation. I mean, the planning system in this country is really broken, and I would say that to anybody. I say it to planners, and most of them agree with me. Most of them know. I mean, there's appalling staff turnover because there's appalling low pay and really high stress in those planning committees, and none of them have got the resources to deal with the complicated issues that they're dealing with. So it's not an attack on the people in the planning departments. I'm really sympathetic with them, but the trouble is there's no alternative. There's nobody else taking up the slack, or there's no other organisation that can say, okay, well we'll look out for that, or we'll look at the farming infrastructure and say whether it's okay or not. So we have stasis and delay, and
that wasn't just a short one-word answer, was it? So final question at the back.
I work at a place called Farm Ed, and we've got an established CSA on the farm already. We get quite a few people that approach us that have either recently inherited land or have a small field that they've just been mowing for years and don't know what to do with it. I was wondering what we could advise landowners, like the first step that landowners could take to find someone that wants to set up a CSA.
Good question. Well, so the CSA network has been talking to various people, ELC I think among them, about a sort of registry effectively, like a kind of matchmaking service, which I think would be great, because I think you're right, there are a lot of landowners that would be really up for this and really supportive of it, but don't know how to find them. So I guess initially getting in touch with someone like the LC or the CSA network would be a good start, because we might know of people in that area that are keen to start something up. But it would be great to have something a little bit more structured and formal that would allow us to do this, because I think there's definitely a mismatch there. Yeah.
There is a land match service just recently been set up in the southwest, and there's details of it on the Land Workers Alliance stall, which is just, maybe it's down that avenue. I don't know why it's only in the southwest, and a major issue with these land matches is they do need to have longevity, because actually it's not just about introducing people. There's a real relationship there that has to be built, and a process that has to be gone through, and that takes time and resources. And there's not really an organisation that's got the time and resources. I mean, we and both of our organisations would love to facilitate that, but we are already on marginal businesses. So, again, it's the kind of thing that's a framework. It's a structural framework question, and it needs more resources to go into it. But there's a lot of willingness out there, for sure.
Oh, one quick comment then at the front, and then we must finish, because otherwise we're going. You need the mic.
Hi, it's just a quick follow-up really to that the lady's question really. So what could a landowner do to make their farm more attractive to a person who wants to set up a CSA?
Okay, I'm not sure we've got time for all of that, but basically, I mean, it is, it's partly about where it is, it's partly about, has it got water, has it got electricity, has it got accommodation? If it hasn't got accommodation, then that's hard, so there's lots of factors, and it might depend on who else is there locally, so there's a lot of different factors. But the more infrastructure you've got, the more likely it is to be attractive, I guess. But thank you all very much. Really appreciate you coming. And thanks for all the questions.
Thank you.